We are in, doesn't matter, it's okay. Still no questions from the audience? I want to be sure. Okay, and I'll just ask mine. There was, there was an interesting moment in the discussion earlier on where we shifted from the discussion of the transformation of the built environment to maybe the transformation of the role of the architect. And at first I had the feeling these are two different discussions, and over the course of the afternoon I had the feeling maybe these are related. So maybe there's a different understanding of what an architect makes or does when the understanding is the job of the architect is to build anew, then to the situation when the understanding is the architect basically is somebody who reorganizes the status quo. And maybe it would be interesting to talk about really how you see your role in this sense. We had from you guys the reaffirmation of a familiar understanding of the architect, which is the architect knows best than anybody else, because finally he or she has studied it, practiced it, got a license, is authorized to deal with it. I wonder if this is still the same, if we talk about an understanding of architecture where you never start at scratch, but you basically intervene in a situation that is already ongoing. And I don't know if anybody of you has anything to say of that. How do you see yourself in relationship to the kind of work that you do? Taking this definition of the architect as this authoritarian figure controlling the production of the built environment.
Is it on? I just need to, is it on? Yes?
Yeah.
No? Yes? Yes? Yes. Okay, sorry. I guess I would argue there never is a, quote, new project. You always are dealing with a context. And for us, we want to be aware of these other systems, whether it's funding realities, infrastructural systems, all of this. And I think very conveniently, architects like to ignore all of that. So for me, at least, as a statement, I think there is no, quote, new. It is always kind of very much embedded in political, economical, and all these, and oftentimes we, especially in school and in the more abstract, like to ignore those realities. Then when we get into practice, we more and more have to deal with those. So at least for me, it's always embedded in these systems. So this, yeah, there's always something, quote, existing that we're dealing with no matter what. But I think that's a bit of it.
Ivo, I would like to ask you, with respect to your project that you did for Cuba, for Havana, what you did there was a little bit more than what an architect normally does. It looked like you are you take in a lot of economical aspects into your point of view. You're almost a city planner. You are wiring up different urban industries like housing and hotel. How can you do all of this if you just studied architecture? Or did you work together with other people?
For this project, yeah, I did partner when I stumbled upon questions that I couldn't answer myself within the realm of economics or social sciences as consultants. But also, I think when I look at where we fail, it's where we can't do things that architects are not supposed to, but we end up being forced to do them. And I think we all know that, in a sense that at the end of the project we feel like, yeah, we were paid for example, the architectural work, but there was 3 times more work because of things that we're not supposed to do, but nobody else will. In a sense, for example, the Tanzanian project here that I briefly showed a clip of, we're miserably failing to execute the project that we're happy with from the architectural point of view, the construction, everything is working on as it was supposed to, but now I know that when they asked us to build a school in Ulayankulu, what we should have done is not to look at how to build a school, but how to build in Ulayankulu. So the context of politics and money making and the partners that we work with is now changing the project in a dramatical way and that we could not foresee. And even if the project was the best in an architectural sense or the worst, actually makes no difference because it might not be realized because the parts that needed the most work were out of the regular vocabulary of architects. Yes, I think that architect can be just an architect within a very classical context of it, but if you're doing something outside of that, it often is the case that at least majority of your work effort goes to trying to understand and tackle problems that are not within a classical sense of responsibility of an architect. In this sense, in Tanzania, I probably should have studied political sciences and be somebody who fights corruption and abuses in church, because this is the context that we work in. And we still call it architecture.
So how do you deal with this moment when you have the feeling you're not equipped to deal with the situation from your professional training and you need facilities that you don't probably have? Can you compensate it by working together with other people that have these competences? Or do you feel you have to go back to school or just basically not do the commission?
I have to say that the Cuban example is a hypothetical still. We didn't manage to convince the local government or even successfully contact them because Cuban reality is so hermetic that it was really hard to get in. And without the support of the government there, the project doesn't make any sense. It's a social housing within a communist regime. Only government can put like a get-go on it and make it happen. And on the other hand, Tanzania is still, like, we're building it, but very slowly. So I'm not sure what's the answer because we didn't answer it successfully yet. We struggled with it a couple of times. And so I'd love to give you an answer, but I'll need a couple more years for that.
Okay, I would like to bring the designers from SCRE into the discussion because we were talking about the historical city before of Portugal, but we could take almost many other European cities which have the same structural condition where the historical city center becomes a kind of Disneyland scenography for the production of touristic surplus value. And there is a certain question, is architecture involved in this production or does it actually play no role at all? And what role has the history that seems to be the primal, let's say, commodity that is being traded? Do you see that situation similarly as your colleagues from Fala?
No, we see it in a complete different way. I think the pre-industrial construction heritage can tell us a lot about new forms of industry, economy, technology, and so when you have the chance to intervene in these historic buildings, you can feed on all of that, and you can actually bring forward alternatives and suggestions maybe on how to fix things that are not right, as Fala was saying, like if regulation is not adjusted to historic buildings, then I think we as architects, we have the chance to, and perhaps the duty to actually suggest these modifications. But that connects our work in historic centers. We tend to feed from that tradition, from all that knowledge of centuries of non-industrialized architecture, but we also try to set the connection into other fields that don't exactly fit into that domain, from agriculture to biodiversity to all, from power, from voltage, from industry, small industries. How do you create jobs? So that this question of transformation, be it in historic centers or not, but if we can also apply to historic centers, it's also not only on what you get from behind, but also what are you putting forward? Okay, so there's a whole complexity, that's a legacy of complexity that you take in your hands and you have to reorganize it and to see where the windows of opportunities there, so that you answer to contemporary questions. And so the work of Scray is very much into this sort of, as I was saying, the one clog of the wheel, and having the notion that everything you propose, everything you suggest, has a huge impact ahead. I'm not sure I quite answered to your question, but
not so specifically to the condition in Porto and other places. No, I'm basically answering. Oh, let's say I would love to know how you deal with the transformation of this profession. A lot of architects, or a lot of times architects have this feeling what they have to offer isn't really asked for in society. And I a little bit had the impression in your presentation like this, there was a certain type of bitterness and of this kind of hurt pride that I remember from, you know, the kind of famous trope of the fountainhead of the modernist architect who has the perfect plan for everything, who knows how to build the city, who has the perfect understanding of what aesthetic the new houses should be built in which people will be ultimately so much more happy than before. So there's this understanding we have the solution, and then unfortunately the people for whom this solution is actually engineered don't buy it. They say, actually, no, I don't want to live this way. And there's this huge split between the profession and its, you know, admittedly best intentions, and a certain reluctance on the part of your clients, who may have also ideas about how they want to live. And this kind of split is so fundamentally ingrained in the history of this tradition that I'm asking myself, is it worth to really kind of cultivate this kind of alienation between architects and their audience, or is it more worth to kind of adapt maybe to a different role in which the architect is no longer the master but more a facilitator, or like Cedric Price beautifully said, an enabler of processes. So that's where I wasn't really sure how you see your role in this kind of situation, because also it felt like you deal reluctantly with this kind of historical mass. And well, I had the impression that you secretly have the plan voisin under your pillow and would love to do tabula rasa in Porto.
I think, no, this is working.
Let's go.
I think to clarify exactly the bitter part of our presentation is that we are not mad that we cannot do whatever we want. Is the fact that we cannot discuss with someone and actually propose changes. There's not that option. So when we talk with municipalities, so higher entities, there's no discussion, there's no dialogue. And that's the bitter part of our projects, and sometimes a bit more provocative in that sense, because we didn't manage to talk with them, because they refuse, because of laws. Then when I talk about clients of the projects, we have several kinds of clients. There are the investors that don't really care what we do or not. We do whatever we want as long as they get profit in the end. We have the clients that the municipality told them, you need to find a client to sign papers, so they, an architect to sign papers, so they feel forced to work with us. So that's the most tricky part, or the kind of more tricky kind of clients. Then there's the clients that are willing to work with us, and that we have very fruitful discussions, and that we model the projects according to them. So we have been doing several single-family houses. None of them has nothing to do with each other, not because of us, but because of the clients. And we are super proud of those projects because there was a productive discussion. And we believe that if we could have that productive discussion with the higher entities that regulate now the historical centers, the cities would gain more from that than if there's just a set of rules that they just follow and that are generic and not specific to the cases.
I understand. Okay.
So just if there is, I mean, all of our projects are done, let's say, with our clients behind us and in front of us. And I think if there is one authoritarian entity, it's really, let's say, the political, the municipality saying, let's say, all facades should look like this, you know, and because I think it's basically the first time in the history of Porto, at least, that, you know, there is no allowed expression in the city center of contemporary architecture, whatever that means. And, you know, and I'm not for, let's say, a city where, you know, you would have exuberant things by any, you know, 20-year-old architect every 10 meters. So that's not what we're arguing for, but it is frozen, and everything that is new is also going that direction. So in a sense, the stiff plan, like the Plan Voisin, is this one. And what we try to do is find some, let's say, space, let's say civic, because for us the facades are very important. They're civic expressions of the architecture, and so that's why we work so much on back facades. And then, you know, of course, on the inside, then we deal with the clients for everything, and that what they want is reflected in the projects very much. But of course, we compose it. So
I'd love to know what Martin Pohl has to say about this, because maybe there's a way how to get further along that track, and I appreciate your answers because it made me understand better what you were trying to say. Martin, you were saying that sometimes it may not be necessary for architecture to build at all, not to build new. And you were giving this situation of this Orthodox church, which is now completely decontextualized in the current political situation, given the fact that it's a country where the Orthodox church has no role anymore. And you were implying that maybe to overcome this alienation that radiates around this building, where people cannot use it but have to walk around, it is necessary to inform more. So I'm wondering, does this actually change the situation? What can you actually achieve with this project that you're doing there? Is there a possibility in an enlightenment about space and the politics of space that will change the attitude of people towards their built environment?
Is it working? Yeah, okay. So it's a very good question, because when I first started, I basically asked Michael and the others, like the photographers, and there's a graphic designer involved as well, to join this kind of research endeavor. We were set out by the sheer interest in Kosovo in the first place, because we didn't know about it at all. You know, we all were kind of brought up and socialized in the 90s, so Kosovo was this kind of abstract area for us which we didn't know. So in a way, I think, yeah, for me it was from the beginning on a big struggle, because I thought, you know, you can sort of swoop in as an architect and you see this kind of ruined building with its political circumstances and its history, the country's history, and you might just kind of turn it into a monument. You design a space where remembrance could be possible, etc. But while I was working on it and while revealing actual information, because when I started, there was nothing at all. There was only the Orthodox Church that complained that it doesn't belong to the Serbian Orthodox Church anymore. So in the beginning, to everyone I talked about, I received the question, yeah, so what are you gonna transform the church into? And I was like, I'm not sure. It seems that there is no physical solution to it. So I was I wouldn't say desperately, but I was looking for some kind of description of that building, while finding actually that describing the current state and how like its transformative aspects, that actually could be the way to translate it to a bigger audience. And by bigger audience, by now I mean it's a small group of people, but I already, even to locals who pass that church every day, when I explained it to them, what I found out, like with these little information, the 1389, all these kind of small details, but they matter, and I kind of saw, coming back to the original question, that, you know, maybe the role of the architect in that sense might not be to find a solution, like a physical solution, but, you know, stop at that point where you just keep it on an informing level.
No, the striking thing about this situation, I think, is this. It seems like people pretend this building isn't there, and in other situations you would have either an effort to transform it into something else, or to demolish it. The Palace of Republic in Berlin, which was an equally contested building, was demolished, which I think was a stupid thing. I don't know, some Greek temples that were no longer used in Italy or in Sicily were transformed into churches, which I think is an interesting strategy. Or the Mezquita in Cordoba, which I think is probably the most beautiful architectural example of transformation that I know of, which also goes from one extreme to the other, mosque, a church and a mosque. I'm wondering, is there any kind of will to do something with this building or not? Or do you feel you could kind of overcome this kind of state of freezing by a politics of information?
I would have two answers to it. One is that the interesting thing is that it never has been used as anything. Like it from
louder, okay.
Yeah, it has never been used as anything. So it was inaugurated, but they never actually had a mess inside. So if you will, like the only real purpose it had was when it was squatted in the perimeter, it was actually used as a toilet. So the interesting thing is, if you want to reuse something, it had to be, you know, like there had to be like an initial use for it. I mean, of course there was an intended use, but it never was used as that. And the second answer, or the second part, would be that I talked to local university students, for example. There was one student who had these very nice looking renderings of the church being a gallery, trying out being it as like an information center, like turning it into like a university building, because it's still, of course, on the university campus. But then I asked her, like just in private, what would you actually, like what would you like personally do with it? Because I guess you also have familiar associations with it. And she said, I would tear it down. So this kind of in-between space is one thing, and then I had the chance to talk while I was researching to the foreign minister by then, and he talked to me and he basically said, you know, like you cannot tear it down, you know, like it would, this, like all diplomacy that would have been done until now, we would just, you know, like open up a field that you know, like we couldn't close anymore. So basically, I think it's this kind of gridlocked situation we were describing, because of course there is always, like, when we look at it, we're like, you know, like it would be so interesting to turn it into something to add to, like, just try out spatially. But in reality, there's a certain, yeah, like you said, this perimeter, what we, you know, like, just kind of called the 50-meter perimeter because it appears in several incidences. It seems to be there, you know. Like, it seems like people treat it as it wouldn't be
invisible.
There. Yeah.
They read Harry Potter. Okay. Any questions from the audience? You're curious to go on the building tour, I can see. All right, that's also a good way to end this symposium. I thank you for your attention. I thank you for the presentations and for the discussions. And yeah, we can have drinks, there's an apéro, and we will probably start in 5 minutes or so at the door. No? Okay, we first have the drinks and apéro, and then we do the tour from there. Good, thank you.